The galaxy had watched Earth for 300 years, and it had laughed every single day. When the Galactic Concord first discovered the small blue planet spinning in the outer arm of the Milky Way, they sent a single probe to study its inhabitants. And what the probe found made the great powers of the galaxy shake with amusement. Here was a species that had barely reached their own moon. A species that burned ancient dead plants for energy. A species that drew invisible lines on their planet and killed each other over those lines. A species so naive that they broadcast their location to the entire universe with radio. Waves like a child screaming in a dark forest full of hungry predators. The Concord Assembly gathered to discuss what should be done about these strange creatures called humans. And the debate lasted less than one rotation of the Concord homeworld ambassador Torvax of the Veth Dominion rose to speak. And his words would echo through galactic history for centuries to come. I have studied the probe data extensively, he announced to the gathered delegates, his purple crest rising with barely contained amusement. I must say that these humans are perhaps the most entertaining species we have ever discovered. The chamber rippled with laughter as Torvax continued his speech. They cannot agree on a single government to rule their tiny world. And instead, they have divided themselves into hundreds of competing nations that spend more time fighting each other than advancing their civilization. More laughter filled the ancient halls. They poisoned their own atmosphere with the waste products of their primitive industry, slowly killing the very world that gave them life. And they argue about whether this is even happening. The crystalline delegates flickered with amusement, their faceted bodies catching the light. They measure time by how long their insignificant planet takes to circle their unremarkable star. And they think this matters to anyone but themselves. Torvax paused for effect, his four eyes scanning the assembly. Give them another 1,000 years, and they will destroy themselves long before they ever reach the stars. And the galaxy will continue on without ever knowing they existed. The vote was unanimous, and Earth was classified as a protected primitive reserve. This was a polite term that the Concord used when they wanted to say that a species was too stupid and too dangerous to be allowed into galactic society. And it meant that humanity would be quarantined on their little blue world forever. The great powers all agreed on the terms of this protection. And the Veth Dominion, the crystalline hegemony, and the ancient Kaituri collective all signed a declaration that would seal humanity's fate. No contact would be made with the humans, and no technology would be shared with them. And no interference in their development would be permitted. And most importantly, they would never be given access to the Cascade Network. The Cascade Network was everything in the galaxy. A system of artificial wormholes built by a civilization so ancient that even the Kaituri did not remember their name. And it connected every major world in the Concord, allowing ships to travel between stars in moments instead of centuries without the Cascade Network. Even reaching the nearest star would take generations, and humanity would be trapped in their little solar system forever, unable to spread their chaos and violence to the rest of the galaxy. The Concord congratulated itself on handling the human problem with such wisdom and foresight. And then they promptly forgot about Earth entirely. But the jokes continued in the halls of the Veth Dominion. Diplomats would use human behavior as an example of how not to run a civilization. And young students would study Earth as a cautionary tale about the dangers of division and short-term thinking. The crystalline hegemony found humans particularly amusing because they were made of soft flesh and fragile bone. And they lived for such a short time that a crystalline child would outlive dozens of human generations. How can they accomplish anything? The hegemony scholars wondered. When they barely have time to learn before they die, the Kaituri, who were the oldest species in the Concord and who had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, simply shook their ancient heads and said that humans were a species that had arrived too late and would leave too soon every few decades. the Concorde would send another probe to check on Earth. And every time the probes would return with more evidence of human foolishness. The humans had built weapons capable of destroying their entire world. And they had pointed these weapons at each other. And they had come within moments of ending their own existence on multiple occasions. Any day now, the Concorde observers would say, any day now they will finally destroy themselves, and we will be proven right. But the days passed, and the years passed, and the centuries passed. And somehow the humans kept surviving. They survived their wars and their plagues and their disasters. And they kept building and learning and growing. And the Concorde found this both amusing and slightly annoying. They are like insects. Ambassador Torvak said during one assembly meeting, no matter how many times you step on them, they keep coming back. The chamber laughed at his wit. And the meeting moved on to more important matters. Earth was filed away in the archives as a closed case. A species that would never amount to anything. A joke that the galaxy would tell for millennia to come, and in those archives. Gathering dust next to reports about extinct civilizations and failed experiments. The humans were listed as no threat, self-termination expected. The great powers of the galaxy turned their attention to their own concerns. Their trade disputes and their border negotiations and their ancient rivalries. And they never bothered to wonder if they might be wrong. About the small blue planet in the unfashionable outer arm of the Milky Way, they never considered that a species might use their mockery as motivation. They never imagined that being told you were worthless might make you determined to prove otherwise. They never thought that 300 years of isolation might forge something dangerous, and they certainly never expected that one day the laughingstock of the galaxy would stop being funny. But all of that was still in the future, and for now, the Concorde was content to laugh at Earth while humanity looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone was out there. The galaxy had already answered that question. The answer was yes. And they think you were a joke. Humanity just did not know it yet. Earth never knew it was being watched, and Earth never knew it was being mocked. And so Earth simply continued to do what it had always done. It survived. The humans kept building their cities and fighting their wars and making their mistakes. And with each generation, they learned a little more about the universe around them. They split the atom and discovered the power that held stars together. And they used this power to build weapons that could destroy everything. But they also used it to light their cities and heal their sick. They mapped the human genome and unlocked the secrets of life itself. And they used this knowledge to cure diseases that had plagued them for millennia. They built machines that could think. And these machines helped them solve problems that human minds alone could never tackle. And through it all, they kept looking up at the stars with their telescopes and their satellites and their space stations, wondering if anyone was out there. Never realizing that the galaxy had already answered that question with contempt. But something strange was happening during those 3 centuries of isolation. Something that the great powers of the Concorde had never expected and would never have believed, while the Veth Dominion and the Crystalline Hegemony and the Kaituri Collective sat comfortable in their ancient empires. Their technology mature and their borders fixed, and their ambitions dulled by millennia of stability. Humanity was burning with desperate energy. They had no cascade network to travel between stars. So they bent the laws of physics until they found another way. They had no alien teachers to guide their development. So they made 10,000 mistakes and learned from every single one. They had short lives that flickered out in less than a century. So they worked with furious urgency, each generation building on the achievements of the one before. The breakthrough came in the year 2087 by human counting, when a team of scientists in a laboratory deep beneath the Swiss mountains discovered something that should not have been possible. They found a way to fold space. It was not elegant like the Cascade network, and it was not efficient, and it required more energy than a small star produced in a year. But it worked, A probe the size of a human fist vanished from the laboratory and appeared 4 light years away, orbiting a red dwarf star that humans had named Proxima Centauri. The scientists stared at their instruments in disbelief. And then they began to celebrate. And then they began to build bigger probes and better engines and more powerful reactors. 2 years later, they found the Concorde survey drone. It had been hiding in the asteroid belt for 300 years, quietly watching and recording and sending data back to its masters. And the humans captured it and brought it back to Earth and spent 6 years cracking its encryption. What they found inside changed everything. They discovered that they were not alone in the universe. And they discovered that the galaxy was full of ancient civilizations with technology beyond human imagination. And they discovered that these civilizations had looked at humanity and decided that they were worthless. They read every report and every analysis and every joke. And they learned exactly what the Concorde thought of them. They were primitives. They were savages. They were children playing with fire. They were a species too stupid to survive and too dangerous to contact. The reaction on Earth was not despair, it was anger. A cold and quiet anger that spread through human civilization like a virus, uniting nations that had been enemies for centuries, pushing aside old grudges and ancient hatreds in the face of a common insult. They think we are nothing, the leaders of Earth declared. Then we will show them what nothing can become. The space programs of every nation merged into a single organization with a single purpose. And resources that had been spent on weapons were redirected to engines and reactors and ships. Humanity stopped fighting itself and started reaching for the stars. The first human ship to leave the solar system was called the Magellan, named after an ancient explorer who had circumnavigated the Earth. When humans still thought their world was flat, it was small and angular and covered with the scorch marks of hard radiation. And its engines were inefficient, and its weapons were primitive, and its hull was scarred from 1,000 tests and failures. But it worked. The Magellan folded space and vanished from the solar system. Appearing at the edge of what humans had learned was Concorde territory. The Kaituri detected the anomaly first, because they were the oldest and their sensors were the most sophisticated. And what they detected made no sense at all. A ship had appeared from nowhere, and it had not used any cascade gate. And it had not come from any known civilization. Impossible. The Kaituri observers whispered, "This is impossible." But impossibility did not stop the Magellan from transmitting a message in halting galactic standard, clearly learned from the intercepted communications of the captured drone. This is the UESS Magellan, representing the United Earth, and we request formal contact with the governing bodies of this region. And we come in peace, but we come prepared. The message reached the Concorde Assembly within hours, and for the first time in millennia, the great powers did not know how to respond. This was not supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to destroy themselves, not build ships that could cross the stars without using the Cascade network. The Concorde decided to wait and watch, certain that this was some fluke, some accident, some desperate gamble that would not be repeated. They were wrong. Within a year, more human ships appeared, dozens of them, small and crude, and covered with the marks of hard travel. Within 5 years, there were hundreds. The humans established a colony on a barren rock that the Concorde had deemed worthless centuries ago. A world of thin atmosphere and harsh radiation that no sensible species would want. The humans called it New Horizon, and they began to build the galaxy had ignored Earth for 300 years. Confident that the humans would fade away like so many species before them. Now the galaxy was about to learn that ignoring humanity had been a terrible mistake. The Concorde finally decided to send a delegation to the human colony, not because they respected the humans, but because they wanted to see these primitives for themselves and remind them of their place in the galaxy. Ambassador Torvax of the Veth Dominion volunteered for the mission, partly because he was curious and partly because he wanted to add another chapter to his famous speeches about human foolishness. His ship emerged from the Cascade Gate, nearest to human space, and traveled for 3 days to reach the world the humans called New Horizon. And what he found when he arrived disturbed him deeply. The humans had built a city in 9 years, not a small settlement or a temporary camp, but an actual city with towers that reached toward the sky and factories that churned out machines and homes for the thousands of humans who had already made this barren rock their own mining. Operations ran day and night without stopping, pulling metals and minerals from the ground with an efficiency that would have taken other species decades to achieve. Construction robots that the humans had designed themselves worked alongside human laborers, building new structures faster than Torvax could count them, and everywhere there was noise. Music playing from speakers mounted on buildings, arguments echoing through the streets, laughter coming from the recreational areas, children shouting as they ran through the corridors of the habited domes. The humans seemed incapable of silence, incapable of stillness, incapable of the dignified calm that characterized civilized species. Torvax met with the human delegation in a building they called the Embassy, a structure they had built specifically for this meeting in less than 1 month. The human ambassador was a woman with gray hair and weathered skin, and she introduced herself as Chen Weilin. And she did not bow or kneel or show any of the deference that lesser species typically showed to representatives of the Concord, Ambassador Torvax. She said, her voice calm and controlled, "Welcome to New Horizon, and thank you for making this journey." Torvax studied her with his 4 eyes, noting the lines on her face that indicated her advanced age by human standards, noting the way she stood without any sign of fear or submission, noting the other humans in the room who watched him with expressions he could not quite read. "You have done well for a young species," he said, choosing his words carefully to establish the proper hierarchy. "This colony is impressive for beings who were still fighting with pointed sticks. Just a few thousand years ago." The humans in the room exchanged glances, but Chen Weilin simply smiled without warmth. "We learn quickly," she said. "Indeed," Torvax replied. "But surely you understand your place in the larger picture, because the Concord has maintained peace and stability for 40,000 years. And we have seen countless young species emerge and stumble and fall." He paused to let his words sink in. "We are prepared to offer you protected status once again. And this time, we will provide guidance for your development. And we will ensure that you do not harm yourselves or others as you learn to take your first steps among the stars." Chen Weilin did not respond immediately, and the silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. "Protected status," she finally said, and her voice was soft, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. "You mean the quarantine that your Concord placed on our world 300 years ago? The one that left us isolated and alone while you decided that we were not worth the effort of contact?" Torvax felt his crest flatten against his head in surprise. "You knew about that?" "We found your survey drone in 2089, Chen Weilin replied, "and it took us several years to decrypt the data it contained. But we managed eventually." She leaned forward, and her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made him want to step backward. "We know exactly what the Concord thought of us, Ambassador, and we read every report and every analysis and every speech, including your famous declaration to the Assembly about how we would destroy ourselves before we ever reached the stars." The room had gone very quiet, and Torvax noticed that every human present was watching him with that same unreadable expression. "We know every joke that was made at our expense," Chen Weilin continued, "and we know every prediction of our extinction. And we know that the great powers of the galaxy looked at humanity and saw nothing worth respecting. She stood up from her chair, and though she was smaller than Torvax by nearly half a meter, she somehow seemed to fill the room. You were wrong, and we did not come here to ask for your guidance or your protection. And we certainly did not come here to accept a place beneath the species who laughed at us while we struggled alone in the dark. Torvax tried to maintain his composure, but his voice wavered slightly as he spoke. Then why did you invite us here? To inform you, Chen Weilin said, that Earth is no longer accepting any status you wish to assign us, and we are claiming our place among the stars. And we will do this with or without the Concord's approval. That is not how this works, Torvax protested. You cannot simply declare yourself equal to civilizations that have existed for millennia. Watch us, Chen Weilin replied, and her smile showed her teeth in a way that suddenly reminded Torvax that humans were predators. He returned to the Concord with warnings that the humans were not what they had expected, that something dangerous was growing in the outer reaches of the galaxy, that the species they had dismissed as primitives had developed a cold anger that would not be easily satisfied. But his warnings were drowned out by laughter. A single colony. The assembly scoffed. A few hundred crude ships. A species that had reached the stars barely a generation ago. Let the humans play at being a galactic power. The Concord decided, and they would learn their proper place soon enough. This was the second great mistake the Concord made regarding humanity. They would not get a chance to make a third. 20 years passed after the meeting on New Horizon, and in those 20 years, humanity spread across the stars like a fire that could not be contained. They built colonies on dozens of worlds that the Concord had declared worthless. Harsh worlds and barren worlds and dangerous worlds that no sensible species would want. But the humans wanted them, and the humans took them, and the humans made them into something new. The Concord watched with growing unease as human territory expanded. But they told themselves that this was acceptable, because the humans were only claiming the scraps that nobody else wanted. Then the humans began mining operations in the Verus cluster, the crystalline. Hegemony had always considered the Verus cluster to be their natural expansion zone, even though they had never actually bothered to develop it. And when human mining ships appeared in the system around Verus 7, the hegemony decided that enough was enough. It was time to teach the primitives a lesson they would never forget. Fleet Commander Krixval assembled 300 warships, the finest vessels in the hegemony navy, each one gleaming with crystalline armor that had never been breached in battle. Each one carrying weapons that could crack moons and shatter asteroids. They emerged from the Cascade Gate in perfect formation and advanced toward Verus 7, where a human mining station orbited a massive gas giant. The station was small by galactic standards, a collection of habitation modules and processing facilities that housed perhaps 4,000 civilians. Krixval broadcast his ultimatum across all frequencies, making sure the humans heard every word. This is Fleet Commander Krixval of the Crystalline Hegemony, and you are trespassing in hegemony territory, and you will surrender this station and evacuate this cluster within 1 standard day, or you will face complete and total annihilation. He waited for the response, expecting panic and pleading and desperate negotiations, expecting the humans to beg for mercy, the way so many other species have begged when faced with the might of the hegemony. The response came from the station commander, a human named Marcus Cole, and it was not what Krixval expected. This is Station Commander Cole of the Verus 7 mining facility, and your ultimatum is rejected, and you are the ones who are trespassing in human claimed space. And I am ordering you to withdraw your fleet immediately or face the consequences. Krixval actually laughed, a harsh crackling sound that echoed through his crystalline body. Consequences, he repeated. You have 1 station, and we have 300 warships. So tell me what consequences you think you can possibly deliver. Withdraw your fleet, Marcus Cole replied. And you will not have to find out. Krixval ended the communication and ordered his fleet forward, confident that this would be over in minutes. It was over in 47 minutes. But not the way he expected. The attack came from the darkness of space itself. From ships that had been running silent and cold in the radiation shadow of the gas giant, hidden from hegemony sensors by the massive planet's electromagnetic interference, human warships erupted from concealment in a coordinated strike that hit the hegemony fleet from 3 directions simultaneously. They were not elegant ships, not graceful or beautiful like the vessels of the Concord powers, but they were fast and they were brutal, and they carried weapons that made Krixval's crystalline body shudder with horror-kinetic projectiles accelerated to a fraction of light speed tore through crystalline armor like it was made of paper, nuclear-tipped. Missiles detonated against hegemony shields with enough force to crack small moons-directed energy weapons, overloaded shield generators, and melted hull plates with focus beams of pure destruction. And the humans did not fight the way civilized species fought, with elegant maneuvers and careful preservation of resources and acceptance of honorable surrender. The humans fought like they expected to die. They fought like every ship and every weapon and every life was expendable if it meant victory. They fought with a ferocity that the hegemony had never encountered. In 40,000 years of galactic history, Krixval watched in disbelief as his 300 ships were torn apart around him, as vessels that had seemed invincible exploded into clouds of crystalline fragments. As his proud fleet was reduced to debris and corpses, he tried to signal surrender. But the humans did not respond to his communications. He tried to flee, but human ships cut off every escape route in the end. He gave one final order to any ship that could still move, telling them to run for the Cascade Gate and pray they could reach it in time. 19 ships made it through 281 did not. The message that reached the Concord Assembly was not a boast or a threat, because humanity did not need to boast about what had happened. The United Earth Defense Force has repelled an unprovoked attack on civilian mining operations in the Verse cluster, and we have recorded evidence that the crystalline hegemony initiated hostilities against unarmed civilian targets. And we request that the Galactic Concord recognize our territorial claims and take action to prevent further aggression against human civilians. The assembly chamber fell silent. For the first time in millennia, 300 ships destroyed in less than an hour by a species that had been a joke just 20 years ago. The laughter had stopped. The mockery had ended, and the Concord finally understood that they had made a terrible mistake when they dismissed the small blue planet in the outer arm of the galaxy. The humans were not a joke anymore. The humans were a threat, and the humans were angry. The war began 3 months after the Battle of Vera 7, and every military strategist in the Concord agreed that it would be over quickly. The combined forces of the Veth Dominion, the Crystalline Hegemony, and the Kaituri Collective numbered in the millions of ships, crewed by species that had been fighting wars since before humanity discovered fire. Against them stood a species that had reached the stars barely a generation ago, with a few thousand ships and a handful of colonies scattered across the unwanted edges of the galaxy. The outcome seemed obvious. It was not. The Concord expected the humans to fight a conventional war, to defend their colonies and protect their borders, and eventually accept defeat when faced with overwhelming numbers. Instead, humanity fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They struck supply lines that had been secure for millennia, appearing from nowhere to destroy convoys and then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. They used their crude but effective faster-than-light drives to attack targets the Concord could not predict. hitting shipyards and fuel depots and communication stations deep behind enemy lines. They developed weapons that the Concord had banned thousands of years ago. Not because such weapons were impossible to create, but because the civilized powers had forgotten what desperation looked like, and when the Concord destroyed a human colony, expecting the surviving humans to surrender in despair. Something else happened entirely. The humans got angrier. Every atrocity was broadcast across human networks. Every destroyed city and murdered civilian becoming fuel for recruitment. Every act of Concord brutality strengthening human resolve instead of breaking it. The Concord had fought wars against species that surrendered when faced with superior force. Species that calculated the odds and accepted inevitable defeat. Species that valued survival over victory. Humanity was not such a species. Humanity had crawled out of the mud and survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly ended their existence. And they had done this by refusing to accept that they were beaten. The war lasted 3 years. And in those 3 years, the Concord learned something that changed their understanding of the universe. They learned that technology and numbers and millennia of experience were not enough to defeat an enemy that simply would not stop fighting. The Kaitari were the first to break. Their representative stood before the assembly, his ancient body trembling with something that might have been exhaustion or might have been shame. "We have made a grave error," he announced, and his voice echoed through the chamber that had once rung with laughter at human expense. "Because we looked at humanity and saw only what they lacked, and we failed to see what they possessed." The chamber was silent as he continued. "We saw their short lives and their primitive technology and their violent history, and we decided that these were weaknesses and we were wrong." He paused, gathering his strength. "Their short lives give them urgency that we have forgotten, and their primitive technology forced them to innovate in ways we abandoned long ago. And their violent history taught them how to fight with a ferocity we cannot match." His voice grew stronger. "We mocked them and isolated them, and told them they were worthless. And in doing so, we created the very enemy we now face. Because we gave them 300 years of anger, and we gave them a reason to prove us wrong." He looked across the assembly, meeting the eyes of delegates who had once laughed at his warnings. "We cannot win this war. Not because we lack the power to destroy humanity, but because destroying them would cost us more than we are willing to pay. And even then, I am not certain we would succeed." The peace negotiations took 6 months, and they were the most difficult negotiations. In Concord history, humanity demanded full recognition. As a sovereign galactic power, humanity demanded access to the Cascade Network. Humanity demanded reparations for 300 years of enforced isolation. And humanity made it clear that these were not requests. The final ceremony was held on New Horizon, the colony that humans had built on a world the Concord had deemed worthless. And representatives from every major power attended to witness the signing of the treaty that would change galactic politics forever. Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin stood before the assembly one last time. Aged now, but still standing straight, her gray hair pulled back and her weathered face showing the weight of the years she had spent fighting for this moment. 300 years ago, she began, and her voice carried through the chamber without amplification. "You looked at Earth and decided we were nothing, just a joke. Just a primitive species too violent and too divided and too foolish to ever matter." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "You were so certain of our irrelevance that you did not even bother to check on us. So confident in your superiority that you never imagined we might prove you wrong." She looked at the Veth delegates, at the crystalline representatives, at the ancient Kaituri observers. "You forgot something important about the species you dismissed. Because the creatures that clawed their way out of the mud and survived everything the universe threw at them and reached for the stars with nothing but determination and hope. Those creatures do not stay down. Her voice grew stronger. We do not accept that we are worthless. And we do not give up, and we do not forgive those who tried to keep us trapped in the dark. She smiled. And for the first time since the war began, the expression reached her eyes. You mocked Earth once, and you were so certain that we would destroy ourselves. But here we are, not because you helped us, not because you believed in us, but because we believed in ourselves when no one else would. She looked across the assembled delegates, seeing the defeat in their postures and the fear in their eyes. And she felt no pity for them because they had shown no pity for humanity. Humanity has finally arrived, she declared. And we are not going anywhere, and the galaxy will never make the mistake of underestimating us again. The treaty was signed, and the war was over, and humanity took its place among the stars. But the humans never forgot the 300 years of isolation. They never forgot the laughter and the mockery and the certainty that they would fail, and they never stopped working to ensure that they would never be dismissed again, because humanity had learned something during those long years in the dark. They had learned that the galaxy respected only strength, and they had learned that they would never be weak again. The end.